Hey, how's it going, friends? Thank you for tuning in to VR Revelations. It is the year of our Lord 2023, January 16th. So let's jump right into it. So we have, a lot of anti-Ukrainian voices right now coming out of Germany. Germany, who is supposedly in support of Ukraine. However, they've been hesitating along with the United States and all of Ukrainians' allies, like England and France and pretty much all the Western powers, in sending Ukraine their best weapons because they fear that there will be an escalation. Now, one of these anti Ukrainian war voices is ex Chancellor of Germany, Merkel, here, as you can see, this woman here. And one of her ex-advisors and military advisors and German general is this guy over here. His name is Eric Vaude. Now, this guy has been voicing his opinion, and he's pretty much saying that everything going on in Ukraine right now is a failure on part of the Western powers to analyze that Ukraine cannot achieve victory, and that, as a matter of fact, Russia are the ones that are going to be victorious in all its objectives. And, a lot of people would agree with him. I certainly agree with them, and I don't blame them for being very precautious, or rather cautious, of everything going on in Ukraine. And I don't blame them for not wanting to get involved directly. I think that would be wise for all the nations, since any direct involvement will lead to a nuclear conflict, because again, Russia is a nuclear superpower, and they said they are willing to use those weapons if the United States and NATO were to get directly involved in Ukraine. And you can't blame Germany when the United States is pretty much taking the same stance, even though they like to pretend otherwise. So there's other news also, right? More shakeups in Germany because, as you can see here, according to the New York Times and various news outlets which are reporting on this, Germany's defense minister resigned. She quitted. That's this woman right here. Now, she has also been criticized because of her lack of support for Ukraine, pretty much on every decision to send weapons and even helmets or tanks or whatever it may be that the pro-Ukrainian supporters are trying to achieve. She has been taking a stance against. And again, I can't blame her. She's looking out for the survival of Germany. But amidst all this pressure, it looks like she has resigned. And again, if we take a look at the article, that's pretty much what they're stating, that she was very slow in her support for Ukraine and for all these decisions to send more weapons over there and stuff like that. And again, it's not only her, but the current Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, has also been very hesitant in sending weapons to Ukraine. As you can see here, this is the current Chancellor here, Scholz. Again, we know that various countries that have German tanks, such as the Leopard 2, are trying to send those tanks to Ukraine to help it out, but they have to get permission from Germany. And the German government has pretty much not been willing to send those tanks or to give these other countries permission to send those tanks into Ukraine because they fear an escalation. And they've also pointed to the U.S. in this decision because the U.S. is doing the same thing pretty much. And so I believe the manufacturer of these tanks or the government there in Germany said they're not going to be able to supply these tanks till 2024, next year, which I doubt the Zelensky government will be around for that long. So that pretty much sort of tells you what their outlook is for the near future here concerning the conflict right now in Ukraine. But, War News 24/7 here has a pretty good update on the situation right now and everything here coming out of Germany. But before we take a look here I found this article by this website here, Wilson Center, and it looks like, as you can see here, they had a sort of an analysis they did at the beginning of the war. This was last year in February, and they were sort of talking about the situation and possible outcomes and sort of what Russia was trying to achieve. I read through the article. They are obviously pro-Ukrainian, pro Western agenda and whatnot. But inadvertently, they did some foreshadowing here of what it would look like if Russia achieved its military objectives in Ukraine. And funny enough, I think they were pretty accurate in their analysis here. So I want to give this a quick read here, guys, because this is some pretty incredible stuff here. So before I get into the article of what this German general is saying, which kind of coincides with what I'm about to read here, let's go ahead and take a quick look here. So now, again, this is a scenario that these guys estimated could possibly develop if Russia were to be successful. And again, this analysis by them was done last year at the beginning of the conflict, and pretty much everything they're saying is playing out, which is, which they must be pretty shocked and sad that their worst case scenario is literally playing out before their eyes. So they said here, consider the following scenario. The front lines are in shambles. The army has been defeated. The road to Kyiv is clear, and the West imposes more sanctions but refuses to go to war. In Ukraine's capital city, riots erupt in large numbers. Protesters call on the government to step down. Armed groups storm government buildings throughout the country as riots swiftly turn violent. President Zelensky, along with a portion of the pro-Western elite, resigns and departs the country, which I've been saying all along is going to happen. Zelensky is eventually going to flee like a coward. A transitional administration is built around a simple agenda. Sign an immediate ceasefire with Russia or with whomever Russia chooses, such as the Donetsk or Luhansk People's Republic, under any circumstances, and organize a constituent assembly election. The idea of a federalized Ukraine could become foundational for the new government, as it would allow installing a regime in Kyiv that would be convenient to Vladimir Putin, but at the same time would sweeten the pill for the residents of Western Ukraine and help win over the support of ethnic minorities. Transferring considerable powers to the regions, including in language matters, would allow Western Ukraine to preserve its identity while creating precursor conditions for the reintegration of Donetsk and Luhansk into the Ukrainian state. Naturally, foreign policy would remain in the hands of the federal government, which in this configuration would always be pro-Russian. Russian soldiers would depart as soon as the new administration was constituted, and the new Ukrainian government would acknowledge the status of Crimea, sign all proposed accords with Russia, and forsake its ambition to join NATO. The formal foundation for the sanctions previously imposed on Russia would be removed once the Ukrainian government accepted the new status of Crimea. Meanwhile, Russia would accept part of the blame for downing Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 over Ukraine, while Ukraine would share the blame and accept Russia's assessment that Ukraine should have closed the airspace to planes but had not done so. Russia would pay compensation and, as a result, set the stage for the lifting of sanctions imposed in the aftermath of the jet accident. Should this plan be executed, President Putin would emerge from the situation as an evident winner in the eyes of both external and internal observers. This is what's happening now, which would allow him to rule Russia for life without needing any additional sources of legitimacy. Rather than being an isolated country with a dying economy, which has failed on top of all the sanctions the U.S. and Western economies try to impose, Putin's Russia would be the leader of a bloc of dependent states and thus an even more attractive partner for China and many other authoritarian and anti-Western regimes. The West's defeat in Ukraine would have lasting consequences for the world economy and politics and would undermine the Western powers in both military and political senses. For the first time since the early 20th century, an authoritarian militarist dictatorship would be at the vanguard of global politics. That is why we must not allow this or any other Putin scenario for Ukraine to come to life. And again, inadvertently, I think they hit the nail right on the head with what is actually happening right now. So I just wanted to read that to you guys because it was a pretty incredible hypothetical situation that they were suggesting there at the beginning of the war, which again is pretty much almost playing out to the T. But with that being said, let's get into the article here from 24/7 News, because again, these voices here that are speaking out against the war in Ukraine are pretty accurate in what they are saying, and I think we're going to start to see a lot more of this, even from the United States, from the conservative parties, and from all other nations, as they realize that the situation in Ukraine is hopeless. And I think the last people to come to this realization, unfortunately, for the citizens of Ukraine, is going to be the Ukrainian government, Zelensky and his cabinet. These are the stubborn, bone-headed leaders that, again, are going to lead to the deaths of more people, while, as we read here in that article, I believe that in the end, Zelensky will actually flee the country. He's not going to go down with the ship, guys. So, let's go ahead and take a read here. The knives are out in Germany, with Angela Merkel launching an all-out attack on Olaf Scholz's government through her general and former military advisor Erich Vodd. Not even the USA was spared from the fire, which, according to the German general, bears key responsibility for the current situation. I would say they bear the most responsibility for trying to meddle there on Russia's border. Quote, with the special military operation, Russia will achieve its goal and take control of the entire territory of the Donbass, end of quote, says the German general and former military advisor to Merkel, Erich Vodd. The Russian attack on Bakhmut will contribute to the liberation of all the republics in the region of eastern Ukraine, he believes. According to the German general, Western support in Kyiv was the right decision, but it is time for the Western allies to think about the consequences. Again, no, Western support was not the right decision. How could they not foresee that this would take place, right? That, like, just as if Russia were to meddle in Mexico and try to make a military alliance with Mexico, I would assume they would anticipate a war with the United States. So, again, this was not the right decision. Quote, it is the United States and Russia, but not Germany or France, that can find the key to resolving the conflict in Ukraine, the general noted. Quote, the only possible way is through negotiations, he continued. Quote, everything else means an unreasonable waste of human lives. In the end, it's ridiculous to say that Ukraine is the one who has to solve the problem, said Vad in an interview with Emma. From 2006 to 2013, Vad was a military policy advisor to former Chancellor Angela Merkel. He is one of the rare voices who spoke out publicly against arms deliveries to Ukraine without any strategy to resolve the crisis, and spoke out against abandoning diplomatic efforts. Vad opposes sending German martyrs to Ukraine, saying it is an escalation even if they are old tanks. Quote, this mission could develop a dynamic of its own that we can no longer control. Again, is it any wonder why Germany is apprehensive about going to war against Russia? I wonder what happened in World War II. Of course, it was and is right to support Ukraine, and of course, Putin's attack is inconsistent with international law. Okay, but let's pretend ignorance, right? Like it's not a threat that NATO and America is trying to arm Ukraine, a country right on the border of Russia, right? But now the consequences must finally be considered. the German general continued. When asked what the consequences might be, Vad's answer is clear. Quote, you want to meet a deadline to negotiate tank deliveries? Do you want to retake Donbass or Crimea? Or do you want to defeat Russia completely? There's no realistic definition of the end goal. And without an overall political and strategic understanding, arms deliveries are pure militarism. According to VAD, there is a military operational deadlock in Ukraine that cannot be resolved militarily. That's not true. There is no deadlock. Russia is literally conquering Ukraine by the step. By the way, this is also the opinion of the American Chief of Staff, Mark Milley. He said that Ukraine's military victory is not expected and that negotiations are the only possible way. I would agree. Anything else is a senseless waste of human life. General Milley caused a lot of trouble in Washington with his statement and also received strong public criticism. Again, all these people that are warmongering are absolute idiots. Like, they're not military strategists, right? They are these people that just have this opinion where that democracy must be the rule of law for the world, right? They want to impose their ideology, but they're not military strategists. You can't just go to war with a nuclear superpower. We're talking about the end of the world here. That's why most of these military generals disagree with public opinion, right? Or with all these warmongers that through their media propaganda are trying to instill this idea that victory can be possible against Russia, the world's number one nuclear superpower. He told an uncomfortable truth, a truth that, by the way, was almost never published in German media, reveals the German general. Continuing, VAT stands by the fact that the majority of Germans oppose the delivery of other weapons to Germany. Continuing, VAT stands by the fact that the majority of Germans oppose the delivery of other weapons to Ukraine, I think they meant to say, obviously, a fact that is hidden from the media. Quote, there is largely no longer a democratic open discourse on the Ukraine war, and I find that very disturbing. This shows me how right Helmut Schmidt was. In a conversation with Chancellor Merkel, he said, Germany is and will remain an endangered nation, notes the German general. The German general strongly criticized the German foreign ministry for its foreign policy in Ukraine. Quote, military operations must always be combined with efforts to find political solutions. The current one-dimensional foreign policy is difficult to achieve. She is very focused on weapons. The main task of foreign policy is and remains diplomacy, the reconciliation of conflicting interests, the understanding and management of conflicts. That's missing here. I'm glad that we finally have a woman foreign minister in Germany, but it is not enough to just use warlike rhetoric and go around Kyiv or Donbass in a helmet and military uniform, emphasized Merkel's former military advisor. Again, that's why we just saw the defense minister resign here. So no surprise there. Whoopsie. Okay, here we go. Proxy war. Quote, we can continue to wear down the Russians, which means hundreds of thousands of deaths, but on both sides. And this means further destruction of Ukraine. What is left of the country? It will level off. After all, this is no longer an option for Ukraine either. The key to resolving the conflict does not lie in Kyiv, nor in Berlin, Brussels, or Paris. It lies in Washington and Moscow, and mostly in Washington. It is ridiculous to say that Ukraine should decide that. With this interpretation, one is quickly considered a conspiracy theorist in Germany. I myself am convinced. I'll tell you frankly, if you have any doubts, I'd rather live under an American hegemony, however you say that word, than a Russian or Chinese one. Okay. This war was initially only an internal political conflict in Ukraine. It started in 2014 between Russia-speaking ethnic groups and Ukrainians themselves. So it was a civil war. So there you go, guys. You guys can go ahead and go and read the rest of the article there. Some pretty revealing there analysis by this German general, and I would agree with what he's saying. Again, all this is pretty much a continuation of the Cold War, right? This fight on the world stage between these two ideologies, communism and America, what they like to call democracy, even though America is a constitutional republic. They're not a direct democracy like they like to boast. But yeah, essentially, this has some religious undertones, right? Vladimir Putin has talked about how the United States, with its liberal ideals, is trying to infect the rest of the world and trying to corrupt the family, the natural order of the family with all its LGBTQ and whatever propaganda. And again, as a Christian, I do believe that this is all spiritual in nature, right? There is this tension between these nations in their way of living and their way of thinking. But at the end of the day, according to the Bible, all nations have to perish from this planet. No matter how great of empires have risen, such as the Romans, whatever, the Greeks, Babylonians, Assyrians, the British Empire, whatever you want to call it, they all have their downfall. Of course, the United States, there's never been an empire like the United States or Russia because of the nuclear arsenal and the capability to destroy the world. So, in the end, I think that we will have a world war because the Bible states that this world is going to be judged once again and burned by fire before God makes his appearance. And I think that's exactly what's going to take place. And I think that God is using these nations in order to fulfill his purpose and his word. And I think Russia plays a big part in that. That's why I think that, the United States is not going to be willing to start World War III over Ukraine. And as we saw there from that article there making their predictions, I think Russia will be victorious here. I think that Zelensky will flee the country. But I think this is going to anger the Americans. I think they're going to be very embarrassed, and I think that's going to lead to the New World Order that a lot of people are speculating about. And I think this New World Order will be headed by the United States and the Catholic Church. I think the Catholic Church will be its head. Of course, all of this will end up in a major face-off between that New World Order, those Western powers, versus the evil communist, right, which will be Russia and China. But I think that's in a future and later date. So, we start to hear more voices like this general here coming out of various nations now, right? As they start to see the writing on the wall there. But anyways, the truth is stranger than fiction. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down below, guys. Make sure you give the video a like and make sure you subscribe for future content. Thank you for tuning in. Have a wonderful day and God bless.